One of Hollywood's newest stars, just 16, and starring in Universal International's The Wonderful Years.
Hi, I'm Sandra Dee. It's such fun living in California and being able to pick fresh flowers for my hair.
In the 1960s, she was the face of American youth, representing happiness, innocence, and California sunshine. Golden beaches, gigs, and the title of most promising new star that Hollywood once praised were all associated with her name. That was just the surface, though. Inside Sandra Dee was a childhood of abuse, a closely regulated youth, a marriage shattered by envy and mistrust, the grief of 7 miscarriages, and a life slowly falling apart because of despair, alcoholism, and eating disorders. The line, "Look at me, I'm Sandra Dee," made her a laughingstock throughout Greece, but no one ever inquired as to whether it was painful for her. After years of living in isolation and never being fully able to be herself, she passed away from cancer and kidney failure. The tale of a fallen star is not all that this is. It is the unspoken truth that lies behind. On April 23, 1942, Sandra Dee was born Alexandra Samolyak-Zuk in Bayonne, New Jersey, into a Russian Orthodox Karpath-Rauzen family. At a local church dance, Sandra's parents, John and Mary Zuk, met as adolescents, got married young, and got divorced when Sandra was just 5 years old. For the remainder of her life, she never saw her father. A year following the divorce, Sandra's mother, Mary, wed her former employer, Eugene Victor Duvon, an elderly Russian real estate mogul. A difficult period in Sandra's life began when the family moved in with Duvon. She disclosed years later that this was the most difficult time in her life. Sandra began experiencing frequent abuse from her stepfather when she was 5 years old, and by the time she was 8, the violence had escalated to sexual assault. This terrible fact was totally disregarded by her mother, who dominated every part of her daughter's life. Only until Duvon passed away from a heart attack in 1956 at the age of 57, while receiving treatment at Georgetown Hospital in Washington, D.C., did Sandra manage to escape this nightmare. But the tragedy had not ended yet. Sandra was shaped from an early age into an entertainment product rather than a typical youngster. In order to get more work chances, her mother lied about her age, making her 2 years older. Sandra started modeling at the age of 4, making appearances in Coppertone and Coca-Cola TV ads. Absolute control was the price. By the time she was 9 years old, she had developed an eating disorder called anorexia as a result of her mother's rigid food plans and portion sizes, which plagued her for decades. In order to preserve the cute little girl persona and keep her from looking overly grown up on TV, her chest was tied flat even during adolescence. She once said sadly, "Everything was adjusted to make me just right, just thin enough, just innocent enough, just marketable enough." A girl growing up in an invisible cage where every choice and feeling belonged to someone else was hidden behind the lovely exterior and naive face in magazines. It was here that Sandra Dee's spirit began to shatter, and those cracks would follow her for the rest of her life. The dark basis for all the disasters that followed was created by a childhood that was twisted by manipulation and motivated by the desire for future glory. Before Alexandra Zuk even started elementary school, she started working professionally. She started working as a child model in New York when she was 4 years old, and at the time, she was one of the most sought-after little faces in the television advertising industry. She frequently starred in significant advertising campaigns for Coca-Cola, Coppertone, and Canada Dry under a new name that her mother had given her, Sandra Dee. She was making more than $75,000 annually by the time she was 14, an incredible amount that would eventually surpass her earnings from cinema acting. Sandra swiftly rose to prominence as the quintessential post-war American teen with her golden hair, sun-kissed complexion, and beaming grin. Safe, wholesome, likable, and youthful. Sandra Dee was one of the first people selected to embody the idealized portrayal of womanhood that was being constructed in pop culture in the United States at the time. However, freedom did not accompany the limelight of early success. Her mother had rigorous control over her entire routine, looks, and even eating. To retain her juvenile appearance, Dee had to lie about her age, bind her chest, and keep a rigid figure. She relocated to Manhattan when she was 11 years old in order to attend a professional children's school where classes were arranged around auditions and picture shoots. She was raised in a completely programmed environment that did not allow for emotions. At the age of 15, Sandra Dee received her first movie job in 1957, co-starring with Paul Newman and Gene Simmons in Until They Sail, MGM. Despite playing a supporting role, her natural acting, camera presence, and naive manner immediately drew attention. She made her official debut as a rising young star a year later when she co-starred with John Saxon in The Reluctant Debutante. After receiving high praise for two of her early films, Sandra Dee won the Golden Globe for Most Promising Female Newcomer in 1958 and promptly inked a long-term deal with Universal Pictures. During the time when studios dominated every facet of an actor's career, she became one of the last contract players. Since then, her name has come to represent wholesome teen films, heartwarming young characters, and most importantly, the idealized American girl that the media has cultivated. At this point, Sandra Dee went from being an advertising star to a cultural icon, not with a standout performance, but by projecting an almost unreal, beautifully manicured image. However, that very picture would ultimately become the weight that would loom large over the remainder of her life. The most significant turning point in Sandra Dee's career occurred in 1959 when she starred in Douglas Sirk's Imitation of Life. The movie was more than just a box office success. At the time, it broke all previous records and became the highest-grossing movie in Universal Pictures history. It brought in more than $6. Based on ticket pricing at the time, it made $4 million in the U.S. in its first year and over $50 million globally. After Ben-Hur, Sleeping Beauty, and Operation Petticoat, it was the fourth highest-grossing movie in America in 1959, portraying Sarah Jane, a disobedient adolescent girl caught between youth, identity, and social discrimination. Appeal to the emotions of audiences of all ages. For months following the film's premiere, her image dominated magazine covers, television segments, and audience polls, despite not being the lead. Due to its ongoing success, Universal re-released the movie widely in the early 1960s after theaters in major cities like Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles reported sold-out shows for 5 to 6 weeks in a row. After that extraordinary achievement, Sandra Dee became one of Hollywood's top young actors. She was listed among the most influential celebrities among the younger audience, along with Tuesday Weld and Natalie Wood. Dee was more than just a movie star. With a flurry of endorsement deals, commercial tie-ins, and her image appearing on postcards, school notebooks, and even fashion dolls, she rose to prominence as a national teen icon. In late 1959, Universal, the company that had her exclusive contract, gave Columbia Pictures permission to use her for a major role. This was a very uncommon move at the time, particularly for a young actress who was just starting out. Sharing someone like Dee wasn't just a business deal in a time when studios strictly regulated their signed stars. Rather, it was a daring declaration of faith in her widespread appeal. Columbia offered her the part of a mischievous, deliciously rebellious teen who dared to take up surfing, a sport that is still viewed as a man's realm. Gig, which was once marketed as a late summer movie, ended up being a tremendous box office hit, grossing over $3.9 million in the U.S., a significant amount for teen films at the time. More significantly, Gidget's portrayal by Sandra Dee ignited a national cultural frenzy around the surfer girl, leading to magazine covers, toys, TV series, sequels, and a new teen way of life. Dee swiftly established herself as the new face of American youth thanks to her radiant appearance, childlike voice, and small stature in a one-piece swimsuit, an example of energy that is controlled and free within limits. In actuality, Gig would spend the remainder of her career inextricably associated with Sandra Dee. She became extremely famous as a result, but she was also forced to conform to the stereotype of the naive girl. She would subsequently acknowledge that I was not permitted to remove the mask. The series of films that followed cemented Sandra Dee's status as one of the most lucrative actors of the early 1960s, if Gidget was successful in making her a teen star. She played a young girl entangled in a forbidden passion between two rival families in the romantic drama A Summer Place, which had rebellious overtones and was released in 1959, the same year she made her breakthrough. Due in part to the widespread popularity of its theme song, Theme from a Summer Place, the movie became a huge hit despite conservative criticism of its content at the time of release. With her wide eyes, delicate aura, and subtly rebellious charm, Sandra Dee became the official face of adolescent love's emergence in American cinema as teenagers rushed to the theaters. Dee had box office successes almost every year after that. While Portrait in Black 1960 signaled a minor foray into psychological thriller area, where she co-starred with Lana Turner and Anthony Quinn in a story of intrigue, suspicion, and romance. The Wild and the Innocent, 1959, capitalized on her image as a charming Western frontier girl. Treachery, with Romeo and Juliet, 1961, a humorous yet scathing critique of the Cold War that was adapted from Peterov's play. She also dabbled in sarcastic comedy. She made a comeback to the lovely teen-focused fare that same year with Tammy Tell Me True, a sequel to the already well-liked Tammy series. In addition to seeing Sandra Dee perform, audiences, particularly young mothers and high school girls, went to theaters to view her as a comforting role model for naive children. These films were more than just box office hits. They contributed to the development of a dependable image of Sandra Dee as the perfect nice girl, always innocent, gentle, upbeat, and never transgressing moral limits. However, with time, this particular character turned into an imperceptible obstacle that kept her from assuming more sophisticated positions. Additionally, that image came to seem obsolete as audience preferences changed and Hollywood entered its rebellious era. By 1961, Sandra Dee was one of America's most adored celebrities, in addition to being a well-known face in theaters. Dee came in sixth place among the top 10 box office stars in the United States, along with Doris Day, Rock Hudson, and Elizabeth Taylor, according to the annual Quigley Publications poll, which was a highly regarded standard in the cinema industry at the time. She was, without a doubt, one of the decade's defining icons. The picture, Temmie and the Doctor, which was another part of the well-liked Tammy series, marked the pinnacle of her career in 1963. Dee perfectly captured the persona that viewers had grown accustomed to seeing in it. A happy, moral, slightly idealistic young lady. Her status as the queen of feel-good, family-friendly filmmaking was maintained thanks to the movie's commercial and cultural success. However, it also further ensnared her in a character that was growing more and more outdated. Few people are aware that, at a time when American pop culture was transitioning into the era of the Beatles, rebellion, and personal liberation, Sandra Dee was the last contract actress still employed by Universal Studios. This was a unique example of the previous studio system, in which the film industry controlled everything from an actor's roles to their public persona. With a nice girl image that was out of date, Dee, who had spent her entire childhood under that system, struggled to find a new path as it disintegrated. Sandra Dee tried her hand at singing in addition to her acting career. She released a few singles, such as When I Fall in Love, a soft ballad that embodied her distinctive style, romantic, lovely, and never overly rebellious. Even though it didn't create much of a stir, the attempt demonstrated her wish to break free from the stereotype that Hollywood had forced upon her for so long. Everything for her, even marriage, came early, as if it were predetermined. Sandra Dee was at the height of her career in 1960. Despite just being 18, she has already become a national adolescent icon, the face of numerous successful films, and the focus of countless magazine covers. She took a part in Come September, a romantic comedy set in the gorgeous Lauria area of Italy, despite having a full filming schedule. There, fate introduced her to Bobby Darin, a well-known singer from the 1950s who had a captivating appearance and a sweet voice. Bobby had just joined the production to play a supporting role and contribute to the movie's theme song, not as a starring actor. Nevertheless, he was enthralled by Sandra Dee's innocence, restraint, and inner brightness from their first encounter. She was renowned for maintaining a professional distance from her male co-stars and was 8 years younger. Darin didn't try to conceal his intentions. He made every effort to be close to her on set, wrote her handwritten messages, and sent her flowers. After years of excessive protection from her domineering mother, Sandra's shell was broken by Bobby's vivacious personality, humor, and unrelenting drive. However, Sandra Dee initially disliked Darin, in contrast to his immediate infatuation. Both Sandra's own and their son Darin's memoirs describe Bobby as impetuous, overconfident, and obviously making, "He's the type of guy I would never date," she said. Bobby Darin didn't back down, though, thanks to his unwavering confidence and uncompromising charm. He persisted in trying to get her attention by making jokes, talking, and even purposefully appearing ostentatious. Sandra's perception of him progressively evolved as a result of his perseverance and the beautiful setting of the European filming. Curiosity grew out of distaste. Curiosity gave rise to love. Then the unthinkable occurred. They married quietly in New Jersey on December 1960, after only 2 months of courtship. The union of two stunning young stars at the pinnacle of their careers was dubbed Hollywood's fairy tale wedding by the media. However, behind the glitz, their hasty choice revealed something more profound about Sandra Dee, a desire to be liked, to take charge of her own life, and to ultimately escape her mother's oppressive hold. The event took place behind closed doors. No media or hoopla, in part because Sandra was still maintaining her image as a pure girl, and in part because they both knew that a quickly developing romance between well-known people would be closely watched. The few rare pictures that have been made public, however, show both of them grinning broadly as though nothing could ever harm them. At the age of 18, Sandra Dee married Bobby Darin and faced a whole adult world for which she was ill-prepared. A harsher reality soon replaced what had appeared like a lovely beginning. Sandra gave birth to their first child in December 1961, Darren Dodd Mitchell. Their love started like a fairy tale, and he would be their only child. However, there were difficulties she never expected when she became a mother at the age of 19. To aid in her rapid weight loss, physicians prescribed amphetamines as soon as she gave birth. Nobody anticipated the fallout, since she was under pressure to reclaim her figure almost immediately. Sandra Dee developed an emotional and physical dependence on the drug. Anxiety, fatigue, and abrupt mood swings increased in frequency. All of her weariness had to be concealed by layers of cosmetics because she was America's good girl, the epitome of optimism and innocence. Bobby Darin, however, was leading a very other life. He frequently missed the most important times for the family because of tour dates and movie sets. Bobby was a talented, wealthy, and charismatic man who was always surrounded by the spotlight and the glamour of show business, while Sandra, who was only beginning to enter adulthood, felt empty and alone in the big Los Angeles house they shared. One traumatic incident after another characterized the ensuing years. Sandra Dee subsequently acknowledged that she suffered 7 miscarriages, which deprived her of any happiness or hope during her pregnancy. Her relationship with Bobby became more difficult as her spirit deteriorated with every loss. He started acting insecure and envious, often believing Sandra was having extramarital affairs with her co-stars, especially Peter Fonda, with whom she had a 1964 movie. The distrust merely widened the gap between them, despite the lack of hard proof. However, their relationship wasn't the source of the most stress. Mary Zook, Sandra's mother, gave it to her. She didn't accept Bobby Darin because she thought he couldn't keep her kids safe and wasn't clean enough for the reputation Sandra had worked so hard to cultivate. An already shaky marriage was made worse by her persistent, strict meddling. She was accused of casting doubt on several occasions and planning events that led to arguments between the pair. It was a silent battleground of love versus fame, physical and emotional injuries, and the smothering watch of a mother who never let go, rather than a life shared by two people in love. Bobby Darin, on the other hand, was unable to provide his wife with the level of support she required because he was at the height of his music and movie careers at the time. He seemed to be aware that his time was running out because he was always touring, filming, and living at a fast pace. Bobby was originally told he wouldn't live past the age of 16 since he had rheumatic disease as a child. Despite his affection for Sandra, he always thought he lacked the patience and time to fully comprehend her ingrained fears. Even though he was fully aware that his days would be limited, he longed for his wife to accompany him. But Sandra couldn't stand the idea of leaving her kid or having to fake a smile in public because she was too tired from anxiety, preoccupied with how she looked, and terrified of losing another child. She was caught in a whirlwind of unrealistic expectations among those escalating challenges. After 7 years together, they finally parted ways in 1967. They made the decision to get a divorce. Sandra and Bobby's connection continued after the divorce. Instead, they started conversing more, like if they were two old friends who had survived a war and knew one another. Sandra eventually worked up the guts to tell Bobby something she had never said out loud in her life during one of his severe hospitalizations. That as a child, her stepfather had mistreated her. Bobby started crying. Sadness for Sandra, for him, and for the marriage that may have been if they had really understood one another sooner. Even the idea of reconciling had been discussed. However, Bobby Darin passed away in 1973 following a 6-hour cardiac operation. At the age of 37, he went dead. Furthermore, Sandra was never given the opportunity to speak to him again. There was only one thing she said: "My life's love was Bobby." She never said otherwise for the rest of her life. Sandra Dee experienced a severe depressive episode following the death of Bobby. She was unable to break free from the mental turmoil that was engulfing her. Her only solace was alcohol. Sandra's health deteriorated after her mother died of cancer in 1987. Weighing less than 80 pounds and consuming up to a liter of scotch every day, she almost passed out. She had to be admitted to a rehab facility by her son, Dodd Darin. His perseverance allowed Sandra to gradually overcome her addiction and restore a tenuous feeling of security. However, the psychological and physical wounds never fully heal. She needed frequent dialysis to stay alive after being diagnosed with throat cancer and chronic renal failure in 2000. Sandra made a small comeback to the stage in Love Letters, performing with her former co-star John Saxon during a brief recuperation time. But in the midst of a long black night, it was just a flickering light. Many viewers were stunned by her 1991 final televised interview, which she had anticipated would start a new phase. The beautiful girl of yesterday was gone, replaced by a weak woman whose eyes and voice wavered between the past and the present. She was criticized by others for appearing frail and fading. Others felt sorry but were at a loss for words. Sandra Dee withdrew entirely from the public light as a result of the public scrutiny that followed, as well as the conflicting responses from the media and viewers. She never again made an appearance on TV or at a public gathering. Her body had been exhausted for a long time, but she had managed to overcome her addiction. At the age of 62, Sandra Dee passed away in California on February 20, 2005. She died softly, as she had wished to do, without making a sound or taking a stage, leaving only memories, suffering, and an unwavering love in her wake. Her granddaughter Alexa and son Dodd were by her side in those last moments. They witnessed the hard reality that a soul that had fought in silence for almost 50 years lay behind the innocent, bright grin of long ago. Her remains were interred in Hollywood Hills Forest Lawn Memorial Park, a last resting place for numerous movie icons. Only those who sincerely loved her remember the once iconic woman at a plain gravestone. Sandra Dee left behind 2 grandchildren, Olivia and Alexa, and one son, Dodd Darin. They are the surviving remnants of a legend, not just family. Someone that America as a whole once loved, then forgot, and then eventually lamented. And her actual legacy started to show through that admission. Sandra Dee was more than just a style icon. She became the voice of people who had been suppressed by social norms and confined. Her narrative served as a mirror for the public to consider the cost of celebrity and the damaging standards that the entertainment business places on women once the truth about her violent upbringing, miscarriages, and ongoing struggle with eating disorders was revealed. In his memoir Dream Lovers, her son Dodd Darin described that journey, and in the 2004 film Beyond the Sea, Kevin Spacey portrayed the sad love story of his parents. She was idolized in both pieces. Rather, they provided silent sympathy for a woman who was formerly viewed as perfect but actually had scars too deep to mention. Despite the terrible aspects of her life, Sandra Dee is still an integral part of American society after the war. A reminder that sometimes that light comes from a place very deep and very dark within, but also one that is bright and joyful and drenched in California sunlight, as New York Times reviewer Dave Carr once put it. In movie history, Sandra Dee was more than simply a name. She represented an age that once thought it was possible for fame and purity to coexist. However, her story serves as a sobering lesson. The deepest wounds can occasionally be concealed by the brightest brightness. Sandra went through all the phases of fame, splendor, loneliness, and eventually oblivion, from a carefully controlled young girl to a lady living in misery and silence. She was much more than the glamorous roles she played, a spirit that longed to be free but was stuck in a mold from which she could never break. Sandra Dee made a lasting impression as a representation of timeless beauty and as a reminder of a period when women were not permitted to be who they really were, despite the fact that she was never able to escape the very image that made her famous. How do you feel about the peaceful and tumultuous experience of Sandra Dee? Was it a well-staged tragedy, or a legacy worthy of being honored by someone who lived and loved in her own unique way? Tell us what you think by leaving a comment below. Remember to hit like and subscribe if you want to see more candid, behind-the-scenes stories. I appreciate you viewing, and I hope to see you again soon.